A sure way for one to lift himself up is by helping to lift someone else. Booker T. Washington. Thank you so much, Adam, for the introduction, and I have to say thank you so much to Chautauqua for the invitation back for Carnegie Mellon students and our Pittsburgh scholars to come and share with you their readings. What is most powerful about the MLK Writing Awards is the fact that individuals, both high school students and college students across Allegheny County and the Southwest PA region, are able to dive deep in reflection. These works are not, I have a dream, Dr. King was a great leader. It really dives into shared narrative. As the Associate Director for the Center for Student Diversity and Inclusion at Carnegie Mellon, I truly understand the importance of diving deeply into shared narratives. You are not able to really dig into diversity and inclusion and equity without self-reflection. So when you are hearing from the current students that are a part of today's selection and the alumni of Carnegie Mellon and local Pittsburghers, which range in generations of the Writing Awards. The Writing Awards will be celebrating its 20th anniversary as of 2019. So from 1999 until now, we have been pushing the conversations, not only at Carnegie Mellon, but within the Pittsburgh region. And in many ways, as I speak with colleagues across the country, this is the type of conversations, especially in the times of today, that we need more of. So again, thank you so very much for allowing us to come forth. And we will have 5 readers to come forth to share their narratives. And what's most interesting is not only the current students within the last 2 to 3 years, but those who over 13 years ago and 15 years ago will be sharing some of their readings as well. Recently in October, we began a celebration of the anthology's publication, and we had individuals who were a part of that first team to actually win the MLK Writing Awards, and to have them share those narratives and words and actually become emotional to say, 20 years ago, I am reading something that is impacting my children even now, is very powerful. So I hope that you actually take time, be reflective, and have active listening. Because my hope is that from the readings and the individuals who are here today, that you will be able to walk away thinking about yourself and your shared narrative. To begin, I would like to introduce Cecilia Westbrook, who is a CMU alumni from 2009. She is actually finishing her MD, PhD from the University of Wisconsin at Madison and applying for psychology residencies in the future. Understanding she received her undergraduate degree at Carnegie Mellon in psychology and biological sciences with a minor in creative writing. At this time, I'd like to invite Cecilia to come forth and to share in her own manner. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chanel, for that wonderful introduction. And thank you, everyone, for coming. So this essay I wrote in 2008 and makes reference to certain things that have changed a little bit in the political atmosphere. So my essay is called Black Girls. I grew up in a neighborhood on the south side of Chicago known for its diversity and its university. It was a little bastion of liberalism bordering on socialism, a crucible of free thought where all creeds and colors mixed, a Baptist university where atheist professors teach Jewish students, was our joke, It was a place where the exchange of ideas so valued seemed also hard-won, surrounded as it was by neighborhoods we didn't venture into at night, and prey to occasional burglary and bank robbing. My brothers and I attended the upscale private school there, along with the other children of the staff and professors. My classmates were from all different backgrounds. We were all different colors. It was the kind of school founded on capital P principles and conducted according to them, a place where everybody was equal and they made sure we knew it. Racial and cultural equality were unquestionable. Martin Luther King Jr. Day was celebrated with a great gala each year, an assembly, a parade, and a play. But it was not a forward-looking celebration filled with the rhetoric of hope and change in the continued progression of our nation. To the children of the lab school, it seemed like a backward holiday, a reminiscence, a disavowal of the strange, crazy people who used to live in America. One year, my friends and I got in trouble for hiding under the bleachers and gossiping instead of paying attention. We were much more interested in the boy Spencer that Diana had a crush on. I had a lot of friends growing up. I had white friends, Hispanic friends, Jewish friends, Indian friends, Asian friends. Of all the classmates I would see in the yard at recess, the ones that I remember most were the black girls. I was so jealous of them. I loved the way they tied their kinky hair back with hair ties with colorful beads on them. They knew how to dance and they knew all the best jump rope games, which I was mostly too uncoordinated to participate in. They had a way of saying their T's which I could never quite imitate. When they talked, it was with an intensity and a fearlessness. The words just rolled out of them with a rhythm and a grace. The year I turned 12, my mom changed jobs and could no longer afford to send me to the hoity-toity private school. We moved to the north side, and I was enrolled in the best public school in the neighborhood. It was a place that rested proudly on its test scores, that lauded itself in school newsletters and assemblies and parent-teacher conferences, congratulating us students on being among the best performing public school students in Chicago. When I got to my classes, I discovered I'd already learned most of the material years before. I settled into a steady stream of A's and consigned myself to long afternoons of finishing homework early and reading a book instead. There were black girls there, too, more of them, in fact. But most of them were not in my classes anymore. Our school was stratified by gifted level, divided into classes by performance level. I was near the top, and I remember seeing fewer and fewer black girls in my class each year. I would see them in the hallways, talking in their rhythm, carefully adjusting their elaborate, beautiful hairdos. They weren't my friends. This was not a place with capital P principles. My friends there were white kids. In junior high, we all slowly grew up together. We grew breasts and facial hair, our voices cracked. I got dumpy and unpopular, and even better at school. I did the history fair and the science fair. I almost went to regional one year. As the black girls grew up, the rhythm of their speech began to change. It became faster, angrier, more grating, infused with slang to a point where I, the girl reading Moby Dick for fun, could no longer understand them when they talked. Not that they talked to me anyway. I remember seeing them lean up against the lockers in the hallway, laughing to each other. This was the only time I saw them. They were not in the history fair or the science fair. One of them, in the year above me, got pregnant and was expelled for stabbing somebody. When the bell rang, they would be leaning against the lockers in the hallway while I would be heading home carrying Moby Dick. And when I went to public high school, I experienced racism directly for the first time. I had a friend, David, who was Hispanic but jokingly called himself a white kid. He was a hard worker, smart and popular, but when we were outside of classes, he would say things like the N-word. I was at first appalled, but he shrugged it off. He said he hated black people because they were gangbangers and drug dealers. David came from a working class family. His father was a mechanic who ran a successful business that he built from the ground up. Their family had spent many years dealing with racial tension and gangs. David was one of the best students in our grade. And the thing is, David was right. Many of the black people in our school were in gangs, dealt drugs, and brought guns to classes. But then many Hispanic people did too, and David had words for them, which were just as intolerant. The great melting pot was in high school gym class. It was not a class I liked much or did well in. I was still dumpy and bookish. And my first semester I got a C. Our gym classes were segregated by sex alone, which meant there were many black girls in mine, as well as Hispanic girls and white girls. We were united by a desire to skip out of as many activities as possible. And since our gym teacher was male, some of us spent as much as a quarter of the class sitting out feigning woman problems. It was in those long periods sitting on the bench or sometimes sneaking up to the locker room to smoke cigarettes that they taught me some of their slang. I would ask them things like what bougie meant, or what it means when somebody asks you what it is, and they would laugh and call me a funny white girl. But our friendship waned during the second semester, which was health class. This was a setting I was familiar with, a classroom, a textbook, facts to learn and recite. There was no skipping out to smoke. Like I did in all my classes, I raised my hand frequently, aced the exams, and generally knew all the answers. When the teacher called on my classmates, they would shrug and looked unconcerned. They didn't know or care about the cardiovascular system or VO2 max. The one time the teacher was genuinely able to connect with them was when it came time for sex ed. This was the one topic that the other girls in my class had a lot more experience with than I did. I was the only girl still a virgin in the class. At least one of them had been pregnant once before. Confronted with this information, which was readily admitted, our young teacher scrapped his planned abstinence talk, and instead one afternoon he passed around an empty Kleenex box, and we had the anonymous question and answer session. Allowed now to speak in their own language, the girls asked serious questions using slang terms like boo-foo. Our teacher answered them frankly, blushing occasionally, and all the girls in the room listened in rapt attention. As I sat there, for once uncomfortable and with nothing to contribute to the class discussion, I realized something about this speech, this language that the black girls had. I'd always found it interesting, but over time I had found it more and more of a barrier between them and me, less understandable, more intimidating. It was like a verbal confrontation. In a world of things that made sense to me, things that I understood and understood how to understand, this was something I did not understand and had no headway into. It frightened me. But for the first time I realized what it must have felt like to them, the black girls, how they must have spent so many years sitting in classes taught in an incomprehensible language, confronting them with what they did not know, watching the white kids around you understand it and succeed and be consistently rewarded. And when you're marginalized like that, how enticing, or perhaps simply necessary, it must be to create your own language, something you have that white kids can't understand. This was not just the language of the black girls, it was the language shared by the Hispanic kids and the working class white kids. It was the language of the underrepresented. Now I'm in my last year of college, here at one of the most elite universities in the country. There are a lot of black girls here. They are in my classes. They have been my students and my tutors. They are bright, enthusiastic, friendly, and wonderful. They, like me, like the Hispanic kids, like the white kids, like the Asian kids, like the Indian kids, have all worked hard to get here, and we are all on the same playing field. They speak with a rhythm, with an intensity and a fearlessness that makes me jealous of them when again. But by and large, the black girls here are not the ones I met in high school gym class. Neither are the Hispanic kids or the Asian kids or the Indian kids or the white kids. My high school had a 60% graduation rate, which was pretty good for a public school. And most of the graduates did not go on to college. I myself was forced to change schools by my parents as they saw me slipping down into academic mediocrity. When I went to a magnet school, I met the black girls I would go to college with. Many of them had grown up in schools with capital P principals. These girls knew the language that I didn't understand, but when they spoke to me or they spoke to their teachers, they spoke my language, Standard English. So did David, one of the few people I knew in public school who ended up in college. This year we elected our first black man for president. Across the nation there's a rhetoric of hope and change. This is an election I'm proud of and excited about, but to me it raises a different point entirely. Our president-elect comes from the same neighborhood on the south side of Chicago where I grew up. He even used to shop at the same grocery store as us, which we used to joke was the communist grocery store since the lines were always long and the shelves were mostly empty. He and his family are black, and his daughters attend the same private school where I spent the first 12 years of my life. When they move to Washington, they'll be about the same age as I was when I moved to my public school. They're bright kids, and they will have a great future, without a doubt. But I wonder how much they know about the language of the black girls. That language is spoken all over the country, all the time, by people of all different races and creeds, but it was not spoken in the lab school. I think if you were to see our world today, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. would have mixed feelings. Our nation now is one still deeply divided, and the division largely follows racial lines. But the line itself is not a racial line. It's a line of undereducation, of marginalization, and poverty. Nowadays, anybody can be successful, can have any job they like, can be involved in politics and shape the national conversation, but only if they speak our language. To all the people who are never taught it, no matter what race they are, those doors are largely closed. Thank you.
And next, I'd like to invite Sarah Smith forward. Sarah is a novelist in Pittsburgh, and over 13 years ago, She wrote for the MLK Writing Awards a piece that is quite powerful. And as an alumni of Carnegie Mellon, she graduated in 2005 with a degree in creative writing and English. Now, Sarah, as a novelist, she has right now many acclimates that I'd like to share with you. She is the author of the book, I Live in a Hut, which was the winner of the 2011 Cleveland State University Poetry Center First Book Prize. Not only is she a graduate of Carnegie Mellon University, but she's a graduate of the Menschur Center of Writers at UT Austin and the Iowa Writers Workshop. Her next novel to be released will be next summer. And the title of that novel is Mary Lou is Everywhere. And it is a part of Riverhead Books. At this time, I'd love to invite Sarah to come forth to reminisce about her MLK writings from 2005.
Hello, thank you, Chanel, and thank you everyone for being here. I have a lot of gratitude for this anthology and for this awards program, and I'm really flattered to be reading in the company that I'm reading in today. And also, I want to just let you know that you're in for a real treat because Lillian Yvonne Bertram will be reading later on this afternoon. And Lillian is sort of like a personal hero that I also get to call a friend. And we went to Carnegie Mellon together. So just keep that, get excited about that. So my piece is a poem, and it's called Reading. Somebody wrote a poem and they put Hitler in jail. Somebody wrote a poem about the skin lamps, the ears floating in wine glasses. Somebody wrote a poem so good they put it in the newspaper. In the newspaper. Somebody wrote a poem so the children did not have to die anymore. It is a poem they will use as shoes. If they added hot water, it could be soup. Somebody else wrote this poem. I don't have to. Somebody wrote a poem about the way we ride the bus together, how all the white college kids get on at the same stop. I think somebody is watching me. Somebody ask Bill Clinton to write a poem with his saxophone and Ray-Bans. Bill Clinton, tell us about Harlem. Tell us about the barefoot South. I demand to see your bootstraps. Nobody had to ask John Ashcroft to write a poem, and he wrote a sonnet. When does your biography come out? Somebody wrote a poem for all the soldiers to read. Somebody wrote a poem for the boy I went to high school with who burned Richard Wright's books. That poem is about the boy's salty blood and crew cut. Somebody wrote a poem, and it knows what I really thought about OJ, but I can't let you see it. This poem is as big and tall as me, but its eyes are not as blue. Nobody wants these poems. They are too damn much trouble. The libraries are webbed with blood. Nobody reads those poems if they can help it. I saw the poem that they put up in Queens. It was as big as the 7 train, and every other moment the lights leapt out and back on again, and it was August for a little while longer, but everybody felt safe reading in the dark. Thank you.
Next, we have Taylor Thomas, who wrote her piece as a high school student at Winston Thurston High School. And Taylor currently is beginning her sophomore year at the College of Worcester, and she stated to me, I'm an undeclared major, but I'm leaning towards sociology. As a native Pittsburgher, regardless of what you decide as a major, Taylor, I know from your engagement with the Writing Awards, you're going to be phenomenal. So at this time, I'd like to invite Taylor Ford to read her prose, Black Tigers.
Hi, everyone. Thank you for coming. Thank you for the introduction. And this is my piece, Black Tigers. I wrote it as a junior in high school. When I was 7, my friend and I invented a game. We called it Tigers, an activity that mostly involved a lot of crawling around and fake growling. Ah, a black tiger. I don't like black tigers, my friend shouted during one particular session of such a game as I backed him into the corner of our classroom, growling and swiping with imaginary claws. I don't remember getting angry or upset with him, but what I do remember is my teacher holding me tight for a long time afterwards, as if trying to protect me from something, and telling me that it would never happen again. I'm not sure how severely my friend was punished, if at all, but I don't think that we played Tigers again after that. We were quite young at the time, but already we had established that there was a difference between the two of us. My friend was a tiger, and I was a black tiger. I didn't see the significance of this event until much later, when I heard someone claiming to be colorblind, not the kind that makes it hard to tell red from green, but the kind that supposedly stops one from seeing race. It's silly to pretend that true colorblindness can never truly be achieved. To ask someone to enter a room without noticing the differences of the people around them is completely unreasonable. Back in prehistoric times, when we were constantly threatened by the natural world around us, noticing differences is what kept us alive. Today, we continue to notice differences, whether consciously or unconsciously, not necessarily for survival, but rather so we can assess and safely navigate through different social situations. We all do it, so why all the fuss when it comes to race? The colorblind perspective attempts to simplify a very complicated topic and often comes from people who don't have to think about color. Because skin color has never been an issue for them, they decide it's not an issue for anyone. They can simply bury their heads in the sand like ostriches and hope that maybe if we stop talking about the problem, it will go away. But this is not the case. My childhood friend saw the difference between my skin and his. But then he went a step further and declared that he didn't like tigers like me. So the problem isn't acknowledging differences. The problem is valuing or treating people differently because of those differences. Those who label themselves as colorblind are attempting to not see color, but in reality, it is what allows them to avoid seeing injustices. I can't really blame these ostriches for burying their head in the sand. Talking about race is difficult for all parties involved. But I've also seen the alternative, complete and utter silence on both ends, and it isn't much better. I have attended a predominantly white school for most of my life, and although silence around racial issues is not uncommon in this kind of school setting, I will admit that I've been lucky. Many black kids, especially black girls, struggle socially when they attend predominantly white private schools. Fortunately, I've been able to thrive socially at my school, aside from a few bumps on the road here and there. There was a time during my sophomore year when racial tensions were particularly high, and a few of my black sisters and I decided that we needed a day for us. Dressed in black, hair picks in our afros, we entered school the next day, a single unit, together in solidarity. It wasn't long before we were called into a meeting with our dean and the faculty advisor of our Black Student Union, on the grounds that several white classmates had felt threatened by our wearing black. The blatant racial stereotyping that had brought us into this meeting was only a small part of the problem. We tried to explain what had brought us to this point, why we were dressed in black and scaring the other students, the racially charged arguments in the school hallways, the white students' determination to ignore our concerns about their behavior, the angry tweets when the in-school conflicts continued online. But the dean and the BSU's faculty advisor, who was also black, were not convinced that our protest had merit, even when we described in details the kinds of things we faced as black students among mostly white peers. The students' use of racial slurs in casual conversation, the boys who decided that white girls would always be better than black girls, the insistence by both staff and students that our issues weren't valid. Once we had finished our stories, I clearly remembered the BSU advisor making the following assertion: if we had not called attention to ourselves, none of this would have happened. And although this statement angered me to no end, to some extent she was right. If we hadn't formed a Black student union, this would not have happened. If we hadn't forced our classmates to give a damn about race, this would not have happened. If we hadn't dressed in black, none of this would have happened. But we did dress in black that day, and we did talk about race, and we did start a Black student union, and I'm glad that we did. Because if we hadn't done those things, our school's problems concerning race would never even get close to being resolved. Where our advisor was oh so very wrong, however, was in believing that without our actions, the racial tension in our school would simply disappear. Perhaps in the eyes of someone who does not come face to face with the injustices a Black student can face, this is the case. But the absence of action does not eliminate conflict, it only masks it. I don't blame the administration, at least not anymore, because I know that their job is to keep the peace. But the kind of attitude that our BSU advisor had, that we should avoid calling attention to ourselves, is a dangerous one. This attitude brings the peace that the administration wants so badly, but this kind of peace, as Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. would describe it, is a negative peace. It is a peace that allows white students to keep their heads in the sand and to condemn those of us who dare threaten the security of their willful ignorance. It is a peace that allows those in charge to only do what is necessary to calm rough waters without targeting the source of the problem. It is a peace that silences the voices of those who want to educate their peers but are afraid of creating conflict. It is a peace that values white feelings over the importance of Black voices. The shocking truth is that I am, whether people like it or not, a Black tiger. No amount of willful ignorance or head-burying sand can change that. When it comes to the fight for social justice, accepting this is only the first step, and it is the only easy one. After that, the hard part is acknowledging that because we aren't colorblind and because we do see race, sometimes people are going to be treated differently and unfairly because of how they look. Confronting this unfair treatment is at the heart of the fight for social justice. To deny that differences and injustices exist is bad. To blame these injustices on those who speak out against them is even worse. Colorblindness seeks to keep the voices of the oppressed quiet and increase the volume of those who are comfortable with the racial status quo. Joining the Black Student Union at my school has been a liberating experience for me because I did not have to pretend to be colorblind, and neither did the other club members. For the first time, I was surrounded by peers who supported me and who told me that it is okay to talk about being Black in school and in America. Of course, as our BSU advisor had already pointed out for us, when we have these conversations, we are going to call attention to ourselves. We are going to make waves. But I would rather be at the center of attention, at the heart of the battle, than be a spectator to a negative peace. Thank you.
Elena Frankenberry is a graduate of Carnegie Mellon from the class of 2008. She is a lifelong Pittsburgher and currently serves as the manager of content strategy for Blue Sky ETO. Her piece is entitled, "I Never Wore an Ethnic Dress." And I got today we rode up together today from Pittsburgh, and I got to share with her that her piece was one of my recommendations for readings for our emerging leaders within the Carnegie Mellon experience. At Carnegie Mellon, one of the things that we've been doing for the last 10 years or so is actually utilizing the last lecture as our common reader. And Jim Daniels and I have been on a campaign to press for the anthology to be the next common reader for our entering first-year students. And I think the millennial generation, these are great primers for the conversations we should be having, both in the classroom and outside of the classroom. Elena's piece is one of my recommendations for readings for our orientation counselors for this year. And I look forward to the next 5 days of conversation that we will be having, reading her piece that she wrote in 2007, and how students today would apply conversations that we were having then due to her piece into their lived experiences today. So at this time, I'd like to welcome Elena Frankenberry to the podium. Thank you.
Hi, thanks everyone for coming. One of my favorite things about, we've had one other reading that I've been to, and I believe a few others, is realizing when these were written and when they were published, and how much has changed and how much has not changed. Or rather, like how much my perspective or other people's perspectives have changed on these things. So that's one of the things I actually like about the written anthology, is that you have your date here when this was published. And sometimes if you can read the piece and then go and look back at the date, you'll be surprised, in good and bad ways, I think. So my poem is called, I Never Wore an Ethnic Dress. I never marched in a nationality parade, or drew a family tree, or said, these are his eyes, her mouth, it runs in the family. I looked for myself in strangers, stood in a grocery aisle surveying the slope of a woman's nose, the color of her hair. I never have felt hurt by a racist joke, never visited a concentration camp or a burial ground, clutching my chest, the old oppressed blood still beating on. I never got a letter the way my sister got a letter, never analyzed the handwriting, questioning the love in the scribbled LOVE. I only ever whispered, I hate, to my parents who weren't there to hear me. I only ever screamed, I love, to my family that is. Cried with my family that is, camped in the backyard, built birthday cakes in the sand, watched thunderstorms from the patio, huddled together with my family that is. And I learned more each year what that word means, but I never wore an ethnic dress. Thank you.
Our last reader for this afternoon is Brielle Stovall. She's a current Carnegie Mellon senior in vocal performance, minoring in psychology and German studies, which is pretty typical for the Carnegie Mellon student. And I know today she's here for a reading, but she's a powerful performer and artist. Brielle is from Central Massachusetts, and she is a student leader on our campus who is not afraid to speak up and speak out often, and often. That's needed nowadays. Sometimes in situations, we consent to things because of silence. And I think these are the times in which we need to hear more from more diverse people, and their shared narratives are important. And she's a great representation of where the millennial generation is truly headed. Brielle's piece is entitled, How I Became a Cup of Hootsie Ice Cream. Now, I had ice cream with her last night, and Hootsie ice cream is an interesting flavor. So I welcome to the stage Brielle to share her prose. Please come forward.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for being here, and thank you, Chanel, for that introduction. So I wrote this piece a little under a year ago, but it was inspired by an experience I had about exactly 1 year ago. And it is called How I Became a Cup of Hootsie Ice Cream. The star of every birthday party was always the grocery store sheet cake, accompanied by Hootsie ice cream cups. the paper ice cream cups that couldn't hold up as soon as the sun melted the ice cream, causing it to melt, and the wooden spoon that was bound to slice the inside of your mouth as you hastily downed the mediocre ice cream. It was a tradition of mine to mix the chocolate and vanilla ice cream together, as I regarded the vanilla ice cream as being generally more boring than the chocolate. By the time the two were mixed, I could only see and taste the chocolate. For the majority of my life, I assumed no one saw my whiteness, just as I didn't see the vanilla ice cream, because my dark brown ringlets surrounded my caramel-colored face. I recently realized that I could not have had it more backwards. In fact, more people saw my whiteness than they did my blackness. This isn't about hashtag mixed girl problems, although there are plenty of those too. This is about how I came to realize that despite the fact that I have to shop in the textured hair part of the aisle, and that my skin has more melanin than my pasty mother's, I have white privilege. Privilege. There hasn't been a day in the past few months when I didn't hear the topic come up with as much ease and regularity as we discuss dinner plans. A black man is seen walking down the street and is shot and killed because he seems like a threat. But a white man opens fire at a concert, hundreds injured and 58 people killed, and he's labeled a lone wolf. White privilege, we exclaim. Privilege extends far beyond race, though. Education, socioeconomic status, gender, etc. In a country that was founded upon the backs of people that were deemed less worthy than those who founded it, the existence of privilege is something that has been ingrained in us, like words on a gravestone. It's almost unavoidable, so much so that it's not uncommon to be unaware of one's own privilege. I grew up in a city in central Massachusetts where diversity was celebrated. The entryway to my high school proudly adorned over 70 flags, one from each country represented by the student body. And each year we put on the International Show, which occurred after a week of celebrating and learning about various cultures and peoples. Friday afternoon classes were canceled so that the entire student body could engage in the celebration, in which students performed traditional dances and songs from their respective countries. It wasn't uncommon for people to learn and partake in performances from other countries as well. During my sophomore year, for example, my classmates and I learned a French song and performed it for the International Show. It's taken years for me to appreciate and understand the importance of that experience, as it gave me the opportunity to learn about and appreciate a cultural aspect of a community that wasn't my own. It wasn't until I left Worcester that I realized how lucky I was to grow up in such a diverse city. I started hearing stories about things that were said to other people of color in my life and how they were treated, microaggressions and blatant racism alike. To say I was horrified would be an understatement. I couldn't believe the injustice that people in my life were experiencing on a day-to-day basis, and I admittedly and selfishly felt incredibly lucky to have never really experienced it to the degree of so many people whom I hold near and dear. This most recent summer, which is now a year ago, rolled around and I decided it was time for a hair change. I decided to have extensions braided into my hair. It wasn't an easy decision to make, though. I contemplated this decision for quite some time as I worried that I wasn't black enough to pull them off. This hesitation alone was enough to make me start questioning how I viewed myself in the role that I play in society as a biracial woman. What does it even mean to be black enough? And why do I feel like I'm not? I did it anyway and found some of the answers to those questions. I waitress part-time at my neighborhood Applebee's back in Massachusetts. It's slow over the summer, and most nights I make less than $80 in tips. It's far from the ideal summer job, but I find myself enjoying my time there nonetheless. I went to work the day I had my hair done and was immediately met with a multitude of varying reactions, which was to be expected. My manager, a large, middle-aged white man, immediately made it clear that he wasn't fond of my hair. He told me it didn't fit my personality and made me, and I quote, look like a gangster. I had hoped this reaction would be the worst of it, but instead it only primed me for the next 2 weeks. I noticed a shocking shift in the way people spoke to me and treated me at work. Customers seemed to be surprised when they found out that I was a college student, not to mention a student studying opera at Carnegie Mellon University. Microaggressions kept flying at me from all angles, whether they were comments made in line at the grocery store or by classmates in daily conversation. I immediately found myself wearing my reading glasses more regularly because I realized when I wore my glasses, people seemed less surprised by my level of education. The most shocking and blatant change I experienced was the amount of money I was making at work. My sales remained approximately the same, but I went from making around $65 to $70 in tips per night to averaging somewhere between $40 and $50. This remained true for the entire 2 weeks I had braids. When I talked to my mom about these changes I was noticing, she said to me, "You see, Brielle, for much of your life, people always saw white Brielle. And even though you're still the same person, you look more like black Brielle." She didn't say this to excuse the way people were behaving. It was merely an observation, and she wasn't wrong. It was in that moment that I realized that I had become the cup of Hoodsy ice cream at every elementary school birthday party. My vanilla had been completely masked by my chocolate, to the point where people didn't even remember that I'm half vanilla to begin with. That experience made me dreadfully aware of a lot of things I hadn't considered before. It made me reflect on my own identity and what it means to me to be black, but beyond that, it made me think twice about my own assumptions and reactions to people. Too often, I find myself making assumptions about people based off of shallow judgments. Having now been on both sides of the judgment coin, I can't be angry towards the people that treated me the way they did. The assumptions I find myself making are more often than not societally driven, and I believe that to be the case of most people. The hard part is learning not to act or speak upon those judgments. That experience also taught me about something huge, the privilege that I possess simply because I'm half white. It isn't something I ever thought about until I had it taken away from me, but having that experience made me reflect on what it means to have white privilege. I immediately felt guilty and in some ways dirty, as white privilege has been seen as the enemy in this world. That said, privilege isn't something we can avoid in today's society, nor is something we can control. There are ways, however, to channel one's privilege into something not evil. People whose voices are inherently heard louder than others need to step up. It's a tough balancing act, though, because having privilege doesn't mean you can speak for those whose voices who have been silenced. It's my job, as a person with privilege, to get the attention of those speaking too loudly for others to be heard and redirect their attention to the voices of the silenced. In a world where we're constantly threatening to build walls, it is my job to be a bridge. Thank you.
At this time, before we go into Q&A, can we give them another round of applause? If there are questions from the audience, we welcome them specifically. And there are mics on either side of the podium.
Hello, my name is Marie Garter. I'm from Chevy Chase, Maryland, and I just want to commend you all because your voices speak in unison, and they speak in unison for what is happening in our country at this time. There are security guards in school. Bullying is going on. Children of different colors, coming from different backgrounds, are getting into fights, and I think that all of what all of you have said is so important to pass on to educators, to somehow get what you're all saying into the schools, to have that be something that children can talk about, write about, because now I happen to be a mediator, and so going into the schools to mediate is another way of helping, but after hearing all of you, I feel that first of all, the way that you speak and the way that you can address people will be very accepting, and the way that you can encourage others to speak and to write in the same way, so that there can be some kindness between all of us, and that you can have voices and strong voices, and I commend you and cheer you on.
Thank you. One of the things that we've experienced in the city of Pittsburgh is the fact that through the MLK Writing Awards, because we really do ask our students, those high school students and college students, to dig deeply into their shared narratives, it really allows for us as a community to actually hear from those whose voices are not always at the table. And writing is a wonderful way to do so. I have found in my experiences with the MLK Writing Awards that there are occasions where, in all honesty, we have students who are winners, who are never able to be in the safe spaces in which we create during the Writing Awards program, for them to actually share. Because if they're a non-college student, we actually have to have parents sign off on things. And we've awarded things for students who were not able to share because they hadn't come out to their parents. Or the parents acknowledge one gender in one household, and the school is acknowledging the gender in which that child professes to be. That's very powerful. And to know that there is an opportunity for us to give a space that is a safe space for that student to share, it is important. And what's happening in the academic classrooms, day to day, actually creating safe spaces for writing, is something in which we take to heart as an MLK Writing Awards program. Next question.
Thank you. You acknowledge the fact that this issue of race is sometimes difficult for us to find a way to enter into conversation about. And I was interested how in several of your pieces you used language that was clearly indicative of what you'd experienced. But sometimes if you said some of those things in conversations, you would be looked down on or you would be questioned. How important is it for us to figure out a way to say things that we've experienced without feeling like that if we're in a conversation, we're automatically going to be considered to be a racist?
Sure.
Hi, that's a great question, and I think the strategy that I adopted in my poem was to talk about the difficulty itself, and to address the sort of capacity for discomfort itself. And I'm only going to speak for myself here. I think it's really important to understand that in a conversation, the words that you use affect the people that you're talking to, and that to sort of assume that it's possible to enter into a conversation without also being responsible for your own education in the subject and receptive in ways that make the conversation not just about your feelings is difficult to do, but absolutely crucial. And one thing that I find personally to be really helpful is to be aware of how much I talk and to do less of it. And also to be aware of what I read, and also to be aware of who's around me in the social space, and just the composition of the places that I go, the place that I live in Pittsburgh, all of that kind of stuff. So I think the world is always a school for all of us, and it's only a matter of our willingness to engage with it. But I do think that engaging and digesting and coming to a conversation from a place that isn't motivated by one's own desire to be given a cookie is sort of crucial. Does that answer your question? All right, you're welcome.
I come from a community in Bucks County, Pennsylvania, where, one of the top high schools in Pennsylvania, and there's a huge problem with race, no surprise. And in this political climate, a huge problem with divisions and so forth. I'd like to know more about the Martin Luther King writing program. Who funds it? How did you get it started? How do you engage people? It's interesting that you have high school students and college students. I mean, there's a lot of questions. I'd love to see how this could be implemented because I think there's a desire, but it's clear from the pieces that were read that it legitimatizes and gives dignity and respect to voices that aren't always heard. So I thank you for that and would like to know more.
Yeah. I absolutely would, once we're done here, dig in even more into the program itself. And Jim and I will both recognize that the MLK Writing Awards goes way beyond just the Southwest PA region, and that is a part of our strategic visioning, actually, as a program. One of the things that we've done, actually, with the anthology is produce study guides, so that any of you can actually purchase copies of this book to utilize in academic classrooms, in study groups, in after-school programs, and we've created study guides to allow for those to have writing prompts or conversation prompts to help you have a reading. Sometimes people have to have things to respond to. And with the particular depth of writing and the heart and passion, and sometimes being uncomfortable and vulnerable in the writings, it allows for there to be prompters in conversations that sometimes even as facilitators, we struggle with. The Writing Awards is fully funded for its first probably 15 to 16 years through Carnegie Mellon University. As an institution, we are highly invested in diversity and inclusion. It is a pillar of the institution. And the Writing Awards now is sponsored in part by our Dietrich College for Humanities and Social Sciences. We've recently, for some of the programmatic efforts that we do within the MLK Writing Awards, because this is a year-long process. Right now, we're in the process of publicizing into the public school systems and private school systems in our region and beyond in Pittsburgh to solicit writings from college students and high school students. Then we have a deadline, normally the last Friday of November, so this year, November 23rd, for submission, and students submit via Submittable. In the early years, certain academic classrooms, everything was handwritten. And we knew in some classrooms within the city of Pittsburgh, students' access to technology would not have allowed them to submit in the way in which certain private schools would submit. And so we worked hand in hand with public school systems where however the writing came forth, we would take and accept and do what was necessary on the back end to ensure that they were fairly judged as a part of the matrix in order for us to be able to pluck out of certain school districts where it wasn't easy for their faculty member in English to actually change the curriculum to be able to submit something. Private schools, no problem whatsoever. Public school system, very different. And so Jim has worked very hard to ensure that our process is open to any student who has a desire to submit. We do a major program within the institution to celebrate MLK. So one of the major university-wide programs that we've done at Carnegie Mellon for close to 20 years is we celebrate Dr. King. It's more than just a one-day kind of exposure. The Writing Awards allows for us to get in the academic classroom if we need to with teachers. We go into classrooms and send students into classrooms as well to serve as prompters to help students with their writings. And then we offer the Writing Awards program itself, which I will say to you, mark your calendars now, you're always welcome. On MLK Day at Carnegie Mellon on January 21st this year, we'll celebrate our 20th anniversary. You are welcome to come. The students who are winners of the Writing Awards, actually, a number of them actually are published in the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. The Pittsburgh Post-Gazette chooses one or two of the writings to be published in a newspaper, And KDKA actually has a 12 noon showing in which we take 3 or 4 of the student winners along with Jim to be interviewed. And we have found that the Writing Awards has become the gateway for a number of students who never looked at writing as something in which they were good at. And for many first-generation students, it became their gateway to higher education. If you look at 20 years of the Writing Awards, it's not about coming to Carnegie Mellon. We've had students who are from some of the lowest-ranked school systems go off to Yale and go off to Princeton in writing, and we want them back at Carnegie Mellon. We have early on winners. There's one, Kevin Gonzalez, who won as a high schooler, I think, and has gone on and now is on faculty in our Dietrich College of Humanities and Social Sciences. So I think that there's many ways in which the sponsorship, we have UPMC that's beginning to sponsor our dinner that we have with the MLK Writing Awards, and we've expanded beyond high school and college winners. For some of the students, their writing quality may not be there yet to be the overall winner, but we've decided to actually, we implemented 3 years ago, the best of from their school. Because we want to be able to celebrate when students do well. So we invite those particular best of students and their principals and their families to come to Carnegie Mellon and be recognized at that ceremony as well as those who are overall winners. Because sometimes it's just being present in settings environments where we foster meaningful engagement. That's something in which the institution we're committed to with diversity and inclusion work is creating environments to foster these exchanges. Not saying that they're not always difficult, because sometimes you gotta have difficult conversations, but sometimes the writing is what sparks the conversations that lead to more introspective connections, not only to themselves, but those who are surrounding them in the community. And it helps to guide conversations that I think would remain silent without the writing. So I'd love to connect with you or others after we're done with the Q&A. We'll get through these 2 questions. Is that okay, Adam? We get through these 2 questions, and then we can talk offline, and then I will get your contact information in order to share and connect you to those who are, along with myself and Jim, who are helping to lead aspects of the MLK Writing Awards. Thank you for your question. Yes, ma'am.
It's obvious that to write as you did, that you did some self-reflection and that you have a capacity for self-observation. And you mentioned in your introduction of Brielle, for example, that this is a time to speak out and to speak out often and often and often. And I couldn't agree more. And it also means to be able to anticipate and to be with and to face into discomfort. So my question is, given that to be human means that we all have blind spots, there isn't a one of us who does not, I am very much assuming that to support people and help ourselves and others, that we need to create an environment, a learning environment that's both safe and challenging. And that means in the process of living your life right here, right now. And so my question is that since we need to speak out more, and when we see a blind spot, whether in ourselves or in another person, what do you recommend, what are the qualities that you bring to the conversation, to bring to the speaking, that where you would like to alert people to a blind spot?
So I think the first thing that immediately came to my mind as a response to that is a willingness to listen. And this was kind of already addressed a little bit earlier, but a willingness to understand when you've said what you need to say and to stop talking and listen to hear and not listen to respond. Because I think a lot of times it can be difficult when somebody, points out maybe a shortcoming that you have, or if you notice it in somebody else, it's difficult to kind of have that conversation, and it is uncomfortable, and it's not easy, but it's very important, and you have to be able to take criticism, and it may not be delivered in the best way, but it's still valuable. And I think of an example. I used a phrase, I don't really remember what it was, and a friend of mine said, hey, that phrase you really shouldn't say that. It really dates back to something not great. And I was like, wow, didn't know that, and it's not my fault. It's not anybody's fault that you don't know what you don't know, but to be aware that there are things that you don't know and have a willingness to take in that information, I think is where this conversation really begins, is with listening to hear and not to respond.
Thank you, Riel. I would like to add to that, I think there's a really important piece about this conversation to do with empathy and active conversation and really an awareness that I think a lot of times as white people, we often feel alienated and we don't really know how to participate in the conversation. But one of the things that we can do that's really valuable is actually to speak to other white people and speak to people who we feel have blind spots. And I think there's a really important concept, which is not, feeling like those conversations should always be shifted to people of color, but that's actually part of the burden that we can take on as white people ourselves. And we can speak to other white people who maybe have shared experiences with us and may have gaps in their knowledge or blind spots that come from those experiences. And we can speak to that with empathy and openness, but also with a willingness to challenge and to take on some of that labor ourselves to educate those around us. So I think it's a really important impulse to ask that question, to ask, how can we talk to each other? How can we talk to other white people and to people who have those blind spots, and how can we try to take on some of that labor ourselves? So I congratulate you for your, congratulate. I just want to respond that I think that's a really good question, and I appreciate it being asked. So thank you.
We're going to do him, and then you'll be on.
I was going to suggest that ladies should go before gentlemen, but
Yes, sir.
I was surprised to hear the last speaker say that she feels she has white privilege. I think we've all heard that President Obama is considered our first black president, and I see kind of almost a conflict there. If he's black, and you are experiencing white privilege, could anyone speak to that?
Well, I can. That's my experience. Yeah, that's a really great question, and it's actually kind of a thing that I've been grappling with recently with the recent royal wedding of Meghan Markle, and the media sort of emphasizing that there's a black woman in the royal family, and just this kind of idea of where does black begin, how black is black. And it's kind of funny, actually, reading my essay. I have not read it in a few months before today, and I've experienced a lot of change and in how I view myself and my role as a woman of color. But the white privilege that I've experienced manifests itself in a way of, people. I have a really, really great friend of mine who once told me that he was called an Oreo in high school. And I was also called an Oreo in high school, but just because I'm half black and half white. He was called an Oreo because he is black and speaks intelligently. And that's not allowed. People are surprised when a black person speaks eloquently in a lot of areas, which was really surprising to me. And I never experienced things like that. And I think that's partially because my mom is white, and so it's an easier pill to swallow for people that, I'm educated and that I have had some of the experiences that I have had because I'm half white. And those experiences should not be tied to race. It shouldn't be, surprising that a black person has traveled the world or, has higher education. But unfortunately, that is surprising to a lot of people. And I've been fortunate enough to not be told, wow, you're so lucky that you get to do these things that you do, or you're so lucky that you go to Carnegie Mellon. And that's kind of how I've experienced white privilege, is that, people aren't surprised, and they justify a lot of my experiences because, oh, well, you're part white. But there is a whole other issue that I totally can't dive into right now without taking up a lot of time, but this idea of how do we classify black people? Because, yeah, President Obama, first black president, or even Tiger Woods, a black golfer, and Tiger Woods is Hawaiian, right, I believe? But he has brown skin, and a lot of times I think the media likes to emphasize color when it's something good. It's like, oh, well, Meghan Markle's in the royal family, she's black, that's really cool. Shouldn't matter, but it does. And so that's just kind of a whole other issue of identifying black people and why we choose to talk about people's blackness or why we choose not to talk about their blackness. But it's a really great question.
Okay.
Colorism is alive and well in today, and it is something in which, when we break things down into those particular spaces, they're creating micro invalidations of the individual. There are a number of books out that I would highly recommend that individuals look to read and dive into beyond just colorism. But really recently at Carnegie Mellon, we hosted for our MLK keynote speaker, Dr. Carol Anderson from Emory University, who wrote the book, White Rage. And the book, White Rage, is a book in which I highly encourage you to take a look at, because it's written from the perspective of a historian and looking at aspects of race and tension, and basically through the lens of history that many times we think we know the real story and narrative, and in actuality, we don't. And at the core of that book, the answer to her question was, why white rage? White rage is really about black advancement. And so there was the reason why not to entitle this Black Rage, but White Rage. And you would think that it would be different, that black advancement should not produce white rage, but at the core, black advancement is the reason for white rage. So I think Adam is like closing us down, but we will be here up front for you to come forward to speak directly with the student readers. And we have cards and books here that are on sale. I'd actually like for the readers and winners, as you notice, all women, actually, it wasn't intentionally done, but they were the ones who accepted our invitation. Please stand and let's give them a round of applause.